Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat on a topic that came up recently in reviews and criticism generally, and maybe life even more generally, the difference between bias and prejudice, which is often confused. And it's particularly important that people who are in the biz, critics, for example, have a very, very clear view of what the differences are and what they mean. The reason this topic came up is that you may have seen a video I did recently on Yunshan Lim's Goldberg variations. A very good performance, not, I thought, a special or outstandingly fabulous performance, but very good from a talented pianist, and I gave a review which I thought was pretty straightforward. I really did, and very fair, and well-balanced, and all of those things. I wasn't trying to go after him like, Klaus Mekala, the Ken doll of classical music, or anybody like that. He's a talented kid, and he deserves credit when credit is due. And I thought, well, okay. Anyway, the reason this came up is because I got some comments, and it's not just that there are Lim groupies out there, Limmings or Limkins or whatever you want to call them, Limnicks. They just came back with, well, you hate him. Well, that's an awfully strong term. I don't really hate anybody. I mean, I hate performances of things. It doesn't mean I hate the artists. That's a ridiculous comment to make. But the idea that if something is not, a rave, it's some kind of, essential hatred of the human being is very bizarre. But hate, the word hate, the idea of hate is a prejudice. It's absolutely a prejudice. If you hate something, you hate it. It doesn't matter when you see it, how you see it, when you hear it, how it pops up, what it is, you hate it. Prejudice. In other words, no matter what the artist does, you just hate it. You're not going to be nice. You've got nothing nice to say, and you're not going to listen with an open mind, and you're not going to listen in a way that's going to give credit for excellence when you hear it, even if it's excellent. Prejudice is a crime, especially in criticism, particularly criticism. It's terrible. Bias, well, that's something else entirely, isn't it? Everybody has biases. We all do. You can't avoid them. I mean, they are a function of our upbringing, our experience, our personal preferences and tastes, all of those things. Biases arise simply from choice, from the choices we make. And bias in criticism is fine as long as you're honest about what they are. In other words, let's take an example. Some have accused me with a sort of aha kind of satisfaction of having a bias in favor of Leonard Bernstein. I saw it very recently, in fact. It says, well, you got to get used to his bias for Leonard Bernstein. Okay, so you got to get used to it. Am I biased towards him? I don't know. A lot of biases are unconscious. I respond well to his brand of music making. I mean, there's a clear preference there. But that doesn't mean that if I have two performances, one by Bernstein, one by another conductor, I'm automatically going to be listening or preferentially listening in favor of Bernstein. That would be a prejudice. And I think that's really, like I said, a very bad thing to have. But a bias, well, I can certainly see that I may have an inclination, a bias, towards Leonard Bernstein performances because growing up in the United States, those were the recordings that were available. Those are many of the recordings that I would have imprinted on. Those are things that you sort of grew up with. It's part of your fund of knowledge, and I might simply know those performances, or some of them, better than those by others. That's a possibility. It's not a possibility when it comes to performances of the things that I'm most frequently accused of bias about, for example, Mahler, where I'm not a particular fan of Claudio Abbado, and I am a particular fan of Leonard Bernstein. Well, they say you're biased. No, that's just a preference. It's just a plain preference, because by the time I was old enough to really enjoy and appreciate Mahler, all of those recordings existed. And I heard them all at the same time. And I had no particular reason to prefer one conductor over another conductor. My tastes were just developing, and that's where they were. So I think that that's, a pretty reasonable way of thinking about it. It's very difficult to refute an accusation of bias. Why? Because people will accuse you of bias simply for liking something. It's a preference. But bias and preference are not the same thing. Absolutely not the same thing. Consider, for example, selection bias. There can be a bias where if I have, like I'm doing a repertoire video, and there's a bazillion recordings to choose from, and I can choose, whichever ones I want, and I deliberately exclude some. And not because I don't like them or because I think that they're evil, but because I have to make a choice, and I'm going to make a choice that's going to reflect things that perhaps I know best or things that I like best. And as a result, the act of selection results in a certain bias in favor of certain things. Leonard Bernstein, American orchestras. Europeans, I find, are really big on bias. They're big on bias because they are. They are biased, nationalistically biased. Actually, I would say nationalistically prejudiced, because there's a difference. Nationalism is his hatred of everyone else. Patriotism is love of your own country. You could do it that way as well. But I often find it coming from people who claim that because I'm an American, I have a bias towards either American artists or a certain view of European artists. I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. I've had an awful lot of experience in the world of classical music, with the European world of classical music, and I have certain views on it. People would claim that I'm biased or even prejudiced against British reviewers, British criticism. I admit freely that I dislike much British criticism because I find it xenophobic and nepotistic and unwilling to actually express an opinion with clarity and firmness, which drives me crazy. And in that respect, I'm talking mostly about gramophone and things like that, where, we've all read them for decades and we know what their biases are. Oh my goodness, talk about biases, right? I mean, it's always the English this, the English that, and you find that in actually every European country, because I read magazines in German and French and Italian, and they all do the same thing. They all do the same thing. I see it in my channel in comments. If I mention an Italian artist, people are shameless. They say, well, I have to like so-and-so because he's Italian. And Italians are crazy that way. I mean, Claudio Abbado and Italian artist Michelangelo, if they so much as belch, then people are going to have an orgasm over it. It's absolutely nuts. And that's prejudice, practically. But, it can spill over. Bias can easily spill over into prejudice. And these are things that, I'm very conscious of. That's what's really funny about it. What really gets me about the comments about this sort of thing is not just the incomprehension on the difference between bias and prejudice and why it matters, because I freely admit my biases, once they're shown to me, you don't really notice them sometimes. You're just doing your job. You're conscious of making choices. That's what critics do. We make choices. When you see you making choices along similar lines, then they claim that you're biased. Well, I don't know if that's a bias, rather than just a preference. But what happens, as often as not, is that you get trapped. You get trapped in trying not to be biased, which means you may make a special effort not to talk about the things that you might naturally be inclined to talk about, or prefer the things that you naturally prefer. And those things that you prefer might be, in many ways, better than the ones you want to talk about, simply because you don't want to appear biased. It's a terrible conundrum to get into if you're a critic. I mean, it happened to me years ago, when you're just starting, and people all of a sudden come in accusing you of liking something. They say with great, sanctimony, oh, you like that. There's something wrong with you. Therefore, you're biased. Well, come on. These are all subtleties of meaning, the difference between a preference, a bias, a prejudice, and we need to be very careful when we choose our words. Of course, today, casual forums such as this, nobody's careful when choosing their words. They just say what they feel like saying, and that's the end of it. And that's okay. I mean, that's to be expected. It really is. But I really, really think that we should think about how bias operates in the realm of classical music criticism. You can write a review, for example, which is 100% objective. I mean, totally objective in its correctness. Such and such goes at such and such a speed. The trumpet is flat. Somebody misses a note. The conductor picks this tempo and accents this note or phrases like that. Everything can be objectively correct. And the review as a whole can still reflect bias. It's unavoidable. Absolutely unavoidable, actually, in most cases. It has nothing to do with whether something's right or wrong. It just has to do with what your choices are. So yes, I am biased. We are all biased. I don't worry about being biased. Those who know my biases know what I do. Those who disagree with them know to look elsewhere. That's the whole point of this. It's exactly the whole point of this. You can't be everything to everyone. You can't be all things to all people. You can't be flawlessly, absolutely impartial in everything that you do. And God, I mean, someone who's flawlessly impartial would be so boring. What would be the point of such a thing? How would you even express total impartiality in terms of criticism? I mean, the very notion of criticism belies the concept of impartiality. You can't be an impartial critic. You have to be a passionate critic. You have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to have certain standards, and those standards necessarily mean that some people are in and some people are out. They preclude other things. It's really very funny. So I don't worry about bias. I worry about prejudice. I worry about prejudice very much because, I'll give you one last example of a prejudice. It shows you just how tricky some of this stuff is. Some people have commented that they refuse to listen to music by performers who were Nazis, including, Fort Wengler, Karajan, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, there's all tons of Karl Böhm. I mean, there's many, 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 many great artists. Wilhelm Kempff, who were either willing or reluctant members of the Nazi Party. And I have taken the position that has nothing to do with whether or not they made good music or not, and I'm going to evaluate the music accordingly. But to claim that you are not going to listen to them at all, that they are disqualified from consideration, is a prejudice. Now, how do you reconcile the fact that prejudice is bad with the idea that disliking Nazis is probably pretty good? I mean, as a general principle, it's probably a good thing. It's very similar to, the ban on Wagner in Israel, for example, that Daniel Barenboim quite rightly broke at one point. I was not, by the way, concerned with the ban on Wagner. I thought that it actually made sense at a time when there were numerous Holocaust survivors who were music lovers, and performances of that music was actually painful to them. And out of respect for their suffering and what they went through, we could certainly get through a ban on Wagner. You can buy a record. I mean, who cares? I don't think it's a big deal one way or another, but I understood it. I understood it, even though I disagreed with it. I understood it. Some people can't rise above their own particular situations, and they shouldn't be asked to. They really shouldn't be. It's not our business. So I got that. And when Barenboim went and played Wagner in Israel, he broke a prejudice. And I have many friends from Israel. I have family in Israel. Lots of people. They had no problem listening to Wagner. So, So yeah, there are prejudices. Sometimes they're not as bad as they might be. Depends on what the prejudice is. Even there are nuances. That's my point. But a prejudice in a critic, I think, is just about always a bad thing. Not because, their own personal taste is right or wrong, but because it's limiting. It limits what you as a critic can do. It limits your range. It limits your ability to evaluate the universe of music and make recommendations based on reasonably objective comparisons. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. So, like I said, it's an interesting question. I hope you don't mind my just blathering about it here. I mean, I tend to do that now and again. But it was a topic that came up, and I just felt I should hold forth on it a little bit, just to, if not clarify, then to muddy the waters productively, so that we can think about the concept and the idea, and you can think about where you stand on it and how you wish to evaluate the work of me or any other critic who's out there, what their own biases are, how they affect you, your perception, your taste, your desire to interact with them and read or see what they have to say. All of that comes into play. And so I wanted to throw it out there for you to think about. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.